The wildfire in Ojai ended in 1948. Something else didn't. It still walks Creek Road at night, blackened and thin, carrying the smell of a fire that never finished burning. And it moves closer when your headlights fail. This happened in late December 2025 on Creek Road in the Ojai Valley, California. I wasn't hunting legends or chasing internet stories. I was driving home after a long shift, tired, distracted, choosing the quieter road because it usually saved time and had less traffic after midnight. People who live near Ojai don't talk casually about Creek Road. They don't joke about it or try to scare newcomers. They just avoid it. If you bring it up, conversations stall. Someone will say, "Just don't stop out there," and then change the subject. No one wants to explain why. The fire itself is real. In 1948, a fast-moving wildfire tore through parts of the valley, destroying homes and forcing families to flee with almost no warning. A father and son were trapped near the hills. The father didn't survive. The son did. What happened after that depends on who's telling the story, but every version ends the same way. The boy walked into the hills after the fire, and something inside him burned longer than the flames ever did. They call what remains the Char Man. I didn't believe in him. I believed in coincidence. I believed in bad roads, old wiring, and cars failing at the worst possible moments. I believed fear made people connect dots that weren't really there. That belief lasted until my engine shut off without warning. It was just after 11 p.m. when my headlights dimmed, not completely, but enough to notice. The road narrowed ahead, trees leaning inward, canyon walls holding onto the day's heat even in winter. My radio crackled once and went silent. Then the engine died. No sputter, no warning lights, just sudden quiet. I coasted to the shoulder and sat there, listening. Creek Road doesn't go silent naturally. Even late at night there's wind, insects, distant movement. This silence felt intentional, like something had pressed pause. I turned the key again. Nothing. That's when the smell hit. Not smoke, burned wood, sulfur. Something organic charred past recognition. It didn't drift in slowly. It arrived all at once, thick enough to taste, heavy enough to settle in my throat. I stepped out of the car. The air felt dense, unmoving, like the night itself was holding its breath. I opened the hood out of habit. Everything looked normal, too normal. Then I heard movement behind me, not footsteps, dragging. Slow, uneven, gravel shifting against asphalt. I told myself it was an animal. I told myself not to turn around too fast, like moving carefully might keep whatever it was from noticing me. When I finally turned, something stood in the road behind my car. My brain hesitated before giving it a name. It was tall and thin, blackened like wood pulled from a fire pit long after the flames died. Its shoulders slumped forward unnaturally, spine curved as if gravity worked differently on burned things. No clothes, no hair, and no face. Where a face should have been was smooth, cracked darkness, like bark burned until all detail gave up. Ash flaked off slowly with each movement, drifting down and disappearing before it hit the ground. The smell intensified. The figure took one step forward. I stepped back. It reacted immediately. My car alarm went off by itself. Not loud, not continuous. One weak, choking honk, then silence again. The figure stopped moving and tilted its head slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. I whispered, "Hey," without thinking, like politeness still applied. The Char Man lifted one arm. The hand was wrong. Fingers fused together, blackened like melted wax. When his palm touched my hood, it left a charred handprint that smoked faintly in the cold air. My engine tried to turn over on its own. It failed. He moved closer, dragging one foot, never rushing. There was no anger in the way he approached, no urgency, just certainty, like he had done this before and knew exactly how long it took people to panic. I backed toward the driver's door. He mirrored me. My phone vibrated in my pocket, even though it had no signal. When I pulled it out, the screen stayed black, reflecting the road behind me. In that reflection, the figure stood closer than I expected, close enough to see his skin splitting, ash lifting and settling again. The smell burned my eyes. I slammed the door and locked it. The Char Man didn't react to the sound. He placed his hand against the driver's side window. The glass didn't crack. It creaked, bowing inward slightly, like it was softening under heat that wasn't there anymore. My breath fogged the inside of the car while the outside air stayed perfectly still. I screamed. He leaned closer, not fast, curious. Something scraped along the side of my car, metal against metal. His fingers dragged across the door, carving shallow grooves in the paint. Tiny sparks flickered and died instantly. At 2 a.m., the engine started. Once. I didn't question it. I hit the gas and the car lurched forward, tires screaming as they grabbed the road. In the rearview mirror, The figure stood in the headlights, watching calmly, like the encounter had gone exactly as planned. I drove until the road straightened and the trees thinned. When I finally stopped at a gas station miles away, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The smell stayed with me. The next morning, I checked the car. There were deep scratches along the driver's side door, not from branches. On the hood, the handprint remained, burned into the paint like it never cooled. No mechanic could explain the engine failure, no electrical issue, no logged fault. When I mentioned Creek Road, the technician stopped typing. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded. Later that week, I saw dashcam footage circulating online, posted in late 2025. A burned, staggering figure stepping calmly toward a stalled car. Same posture, same drag, same lack of urgency. People argued in the comments. Costume, prank, fake. But nobody explained why engines stalled in the same stretch of road, why witnesses described the same smell, why some drivers reported scratches afterward. The fire in Ojai ended in 1948, but fires don't always stop burning just because there's nothing left to consume. Some fires learn the shape of roads. They learn where cars fail. They learn how close to stand without being seen. I don't drive Creek Road anymore, not because I'm afraid of seeing him again, but because I'm afraid of what happens when he decides not to stop at the car. If your engine died there tonight, would you stay locked inside or run into the dark woods alone? The sound came from under the ice, not a crack, not a shift, a hum, low, steady, patient, like someone singing without words directly beneath my boots. That was the moment I finally understood why Inuit parents don't tell this story to scare their children. They tell it so their children stay alive. This happened in late November 2025, along a frozen Arctic coastline, where the land doesn't end so much as it gives up and lets the sea decide what happens next. Out there, ice isn't solid the way people imagine. It breathes, it flexes, it listens. Every step reminds you that water is waiting underneath, cold enough to erase a person in minutes. I was there with two local men who had grown up on that ice. They weren't thrill seekers or storytellers. They were practical, quiet, the kind of people who know when not to speak, because speaking wastes heat and time. If something unsettled them, it meant something was wrong. They didn't like the humming. Neither did I. The legend of the Kalupalik isn't whispered like a campfire story. It's spoken plainly, early, passed down the same way you pass down rules about thin ice and bad weather. Children are told she lives beneath the frozen water. She hums, she waits, and she carries a pouch on her back for children who wander too close to the edge. People outside the Arctic like to call it metaphor, a survival myth, a warning dressed up as a monster. That's what I believed, until the humming started matching my breathing. We were out just after 11 p.m., when darkness feels permanent and the horizon disappears entirely. The ice stretched out in broken plates and pressure ridges, frozen into jagged shapes. The sea beneath it was alive in a way land never is, moving constantly, pushing upward, searching for weak points. The hum came again. It wasn't loud. Loud things trigger fear. This sound was gentle, almost comforting, the way someone hums without realizing they're doing it. It slid up through the ice and into my chest, vibrating just enough that I felt it before I fully heard it. One of the men raised his hand for silence. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. We all heard the scratching next, not sharp, careful, like long nails being dragged slowly along the underside of the ice, exploring, testing thickness, learning shape. The sound moved beneath us in a slow circle, stopping occasionally, then continuing, like something deciding where it wanted to be. I took a step back without thinking. The hum stopped instantly. The silence that followed was worse. Not empty silence, focused silence. The kind you feel when you realize something noticed your movement and adjusted its behavior. The ice shifted slightly, not enough to crack, just enough to remind us how thin the boundary really was. A dark shape passed beneath the surface, long and smooth, too controlled to be debris. My eyes tried to follow it and failed. The water below wasn't reflective. Light didn't bounce back the way it should. It felt swallowed. One of the men finally spoke, quietly, in a tone you'd use around sleeping children. Don't answer it. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. The hum returned, softer now, closer to the edge of the flow, where the ice naturally thinned. It changed pitch slightly, rising, and falling in a slow rhythm. It didn't sound random. It sounded intentional, like a question that didn't need words. That's when the smell reached us. Not salt, not fish, sulfur, rot, cold metal. The smell of something wet that never dries, clinging to the back of your throat. It didn't drift in on the wind. It came straight up through the ice. Something broke the surface near the edge. Not fully, just enough. A hand emerged, greenish in the weak light, slick and scaled, fingers too long and bending slightly the wrong way. The claws were dark and curved, scraping gently against the ice like it was being stroked instead of attacked. The hand withdrew slowly. The hum deepened. It sounded closer to a voice now, not forming words, but shaping meaning, comfort, invitation, the kind of sound that makes you lean forward without understanding why. My phone vibrated in my pocket, even though there was no signal. The screen lit by itself, then dimmed, then lit again, as if something beneath the ice was testing how attention worked. One of the men grabbed my sleeve hard. That's when I realized I drifted closer to the edge without deciding to. The ice beneath my boots felt different there, not cracked, just tired, like it had been holding weight for too long. The scratching returned, louder now, closer to the surface. We heard fabric tearing beneath the water, slow and deliberate, like something adjusting a strap or opening a pouch. I didn't need to see it to understand. The Kalupalik doesn't rush. She waits until curiosity does the work, until children lean forward, until adults forget they're not immune. A shape rose beneath the ice, larger than before. Long strands of hair, or something like hair, floated under the surface, pale and drifting. A face pressed upward briefly, distorted by ice and water, features wrong in a way that made my stomach drop. Wide mouth, eyes too still. The hum stopped completely. The silence pressed in so hard it felt physical. Then the claws struck, not violently, precisely. 3 long scratches scored the ice near my feet, shallow but exact, like marks used to measure distance, to test how much weight the surface could still tolerate. A distant drone light appeared far down the coastline, a moving star from a research team working another stretch of ice. The reaction was immediate. The hum dropped in pitch and slid away from the sound, retreating without panic. The water shifted. The shape beneath us pulled back, gliding into deeper darkness. The smell lingered longer than it should have, stubborn and oily, refusing to leave. The ice went quiet again. No hum, no scratching, just our breathing and the distant movement of the sea beneath everything. We didn't speak on the way back. We didn't need to. The silence felt earned, like speaking too soon would invite the sound back. Later, inside, with walls between us and the water, one of the men finally told me what children are taught early. The Kalupalik doesn't always take you. Sometimes she just lets you hear her, so you'll remember the sound the next time you're alone on the ice. In the days that followed, reports came in from other villages. Unexplained humming beneath docks. Long scratch marks on boats pulled up for winter. Drones capturing slow, fen-like shapes moving under thinning ice where nothing should be swimming that steadily. Scientists called it acoustic resonance. Locals didn't. They said the ice is thinning earlier, every year. And hungry things notice changes like that. I still hear the hum sometimes when everything is quiet enough. Not loud, not threatening. Just steady, patient, like something waiting for someone to forget how close the edge really is. If you heard that humming beneath your feet on the ice tonight, would you trust yourself not to listen? Nobody ever tells you the scariest thing about huggin' Molly. She doesn't chase. She waits in the dark until you notice how far away everyone else really is. Then she opens her arms and lets you decide how this ends. I learned that on a cold night in early January 2026 in Abbeville, Alabama, a town that goes quiet earlier than it should and stays that way longer than feels normal. By day, Abbeville feels slow but friendly. By night, it feels like the town folds inward, like streets shrink and shadows grow taller. I was born there, grew up there, and like everyone else, I heard the stories before I was old enough to understand them. Be home before dark. Don't cut through alleys. If you hear footsteps behind you, don't look back. Always the same name, spoken half jokingly and half serious, Huggin' Molly. They say she's 7 feet tall, wears all black, wide, brimmed hat, long dress that never moves in the wind. She doesn't scream, doesn't threaten, doesn't carry weapons. She just chases people through the streets at night, and when she catches them, she wraps her arms around them and squeezes. Not hard enough to hurt, just hard enough to change something. As kids, we laughed about it, drew tall stick figures on notebooks, dared each other to say her name 3 times under streetlights. It felt harmless, like all the other stories towns tell themselves. That feeling doesn't survive adulthood. On that night, I was walking home from a friend's place a few blocks from the courthouse square. My car was in the shop, and I'd made the mistake of thinking Abbeville was small enough to cross on foot without consequence. When I stepped onto a street where the houses sit farther back from the road and the lights are spaced wider apart, the air had that southern winter chill that seeps in slowly, not biting, just persistent. The kind that makes sounds travel farther than they should. I noticed the quiet first. No dogs barking, no TV noise leaking from windows, no cars passing in either direction. Just my footsteps and the faint hum of a streetlight ahead, flickering like it was tired of doing its job. That's when I saw her. She stood beneath the light at the far end of the block. At first, my brain tried to be helpful. It told me she was just a tall woman, someone wearing a coat and a hat, maybe someone waiting for a ride, maybe someone walking their dog. But the longer I looked, the more those explanations fell apart. She was too tall. Not tall for a woman, tall. Too tall for the street itself. Her head sat just beneath the streetlight, like the pole had been placed there with her height in mind. Her shoulders were broad, her arms long enough that her hands rested lower than her knees. She wore a long black dress that swallowed the light instead of reflecting it, and a wide, brimmed hat that hid her face completely. She wasn't moving, not shifting her weight, not adjusting her stance, just standing. I slowed down without realizing it. She didn't react. The streetlight flickered. For a split second, it brightened enough that I could see into the shadow under her hat. There was nothing there. Not darkness. Absence. Like staring into a doorway where no room exists. The light dimmed again. She took one step forward. It was silent. No footstep. No scrape. No sound of fabric. Just motion. My stomach dropped. I took a step back. She matched me. Same distance. Same pace. That's when I understood something the stories never explain properly. Huggin. Molly doesn't rush you. She wants you to know she's there. The street light behind me clicked off. Not burned out. Off. The block behind me fell into shadow. And suddenly the only light left was the flickering bulb above her. She didn't move again. She waited. I turned and started walking the other way. Not running. Running would have admitted fear, and some instinct told me fear mattered here. I heard fabric move behind me. Not footsteps. Just fabric, brushing against air, like something tall, passing through space that wasn't built for it. I glanced over my shoulder. She was closer. Still not rushing, just covering more ground than should have been possible. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with no call, no message, just light. In the reflection on nearby windows, I saw her silhouette stretch across the glass, bending where it shouldn't, like perspective didn't apply to her properly. I turned onto a side street, then another, then made the mistake of cutting through an alley I'd used 100 times before. The alley smelled damp and old, like concrete that never fully dried. My footsteps echoed once, twice, then stopped echoing altogether, like the space swallowed sound. She filled the alley behind me. The walls didn't stop her. They framed her. She ducked her head slightly to clear the space, the brim of her hat brushing brick with a soft, patient scrape. When she straightened, she felt impossibly close. I froze. She stopped too. For a moment, we stood there facing each other, separated by a few feet of air that felt thicker than it should have been. Then she opened her arms. That's when panic finally broke through disbelief. Her arms were too long, sleeves hanging loose, empty at the ends, like hands weren't strictly necessary for what she did. The space between us closed slowly, deliberately, as if she wanted me to understand exactly what was happening. I backed up until my shoulders hit the wall. She leaned forward. No breath, no voice, no effort. When her arms wrapped around me, the cold hit first. Not sharp cold, deep cold. The kind that sinks straight into your bones and makes you feel hollow, like something important just stepped out of view and didn't bother coming back. Her body didn't press the way a human body does. It felt like being held by shadow given weight. There was no heartbeat, no rise and fall of breath, but there was pressure. Firm, certain, possessive. Images flooded my head that weren't mine. A small child crying in the dark. A house too quiet after something is gone. A pair of arms reaching for something that never comes back. The squeeze tightened slightly, not painful, but desperate, like she was afraid I might disappear if she let go. Time didn't work properly in that moment. Seconds stretched. Thoughts slowed. My vision tunneled, dark creeping in at the edges. I thought, very clearly, this is how it ends. Then, just as slowly as it began, the pressure loosened. She released me. I stumbled back, gasping, my breath fogging the air. She stepped away, one step, then another. The alley felt wider again. The streetlight at the end of the alley flickered back on. When the light steadied, she was gone. No footsteps, no sound, no trace she'd ever been there. I stood there shaking until my legs remembered how to work. The next morning, I told an older woman I knew what had happened. Someone who'd lived in Abbeville her entire life. She didn't look surprised. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded once and said, "She still does that sometimes." I asked why nobody ever calls the police. She looked at me like I'd asked why you don't arrest a thunderstorm. "Huggin', Molly ain't hurting nobody," she said. "She's just lonely." That explanation didn't help. Since that night, I noticed things differently. How shadows stretch too far under streetlights. How some alleys feel taller than they should. How sometimes, late at night, the air feels like it's waiting for arms to open. I don't walk home alone after dark anymore. Not because I'm afraid she'll hurt me, but because I'm afraid that next time, she won't let go. If something 7 feet tall stepped from the darkness and opened its arms for you, would you run or freeze?